folks. Welcome to the MVP panel on imposter syndrome. And I am joined by a lovely panel of speakers that are going to really share some great insights with us around their career trajectory, really giving, really normalizing their paths of those different ups, the downs, and the enjoyment that comes along with the journey. So I'm excited to speak on this topic, this discussion around imposter syndrome, how it shows up, how to embrace it, how to utilize it as a superpower. And I think that this panel of speakers really are going to be able to give some great insights. And so thank you all just for being here. You all could share a bit around the opportunity, the different roles that you're doing now, and how you all might have stepped into those different career paths.
I can start. So currently right now, I am living fully in consultant land. And so I do a variety of work, some philanthropic advising, but the majority of my work is working with organizations that are scaling. So that typically means working with upper and mid-level leadership, founders, CEOs, executive directors, those kinds of things. And then I also run the corporate training side of Failure Lab, which is an organization that has a storytelling event side, and then it also has the training side, which is my side. And we do work with organizations around culture, communication, leadership, innovation, all of the things that are sort of the most important things.
Okay. I am actually coming to you guys from Merck Oncology. I support the pan-tumor portfolio. So I'm the digital strategist for the pan-tumor team. And what that basically means is our flagship product being Keytruda is divided amongst about 20 different marketing teams, all representing one part or one indication. And so I'm part of the master brand indication, so to speak. I've been in the role for 2 years, and I came over from Merck Animal Health, believe it or not. So I've spent 5 years in the animal health industry doing a similar role, but focused on professional engagement and make sure that we fit or our products are in line with the latest and greatest points of care.
So I currently work for Janssen Neuroscience, which is the Johnson & Johnson company of pharmaceutical companies within Johnson & Johnson. And my role is I lead our professional promotion and consumer marketing team for neurodegeneration, and specifically our product in multiple sclerosis. My previous role to this was around patient experience and developing access and affordability. An important element, at least for me, as I continue to learn, is to think differently. And, in a crowded marketplace that we compete in, how do you actually differentiate and still reach your customers, but still provide them the customer experience that's memorable, so that they continue to come back and choose you over the many options that exist.
What we're talking about is imposter syndrome, right? And so I think kind of going into it, now with we got all the good stuff out of the way, now kind of getting into the nitty gritty of the conversation, I love to start with like, what is it, right? Like, how do you really like identify imposter syndrome as it's showing up? So love with anyone that something comes up to share.
So imposter syndrome for me, I think, to me, it's that little voice inside that tells you you can't, that first doubt. Usually people say, being the outside environment thought I couldn't do this, or they think that this is not for me. But before they tell you that, at some point in your life say it to yourself. And so to me, that's like the epitome of imposter syndrome, is that little voice that creeps in, that offers the doubt within you, and inhibits you from reaching out or trying something new. And it could be as small as, I don't belong in this, store, let alone in a corporate environment. It shows itself in various ways. And so to me, I think the biggest step is identifying that that's what you're dealing with, and it's not necessarily validated until you actually do the steps or think through what you're qualified for, and what you bring to the table, and take that into account more so than that nagging little doubt.
For me, to jump off of that, I think the doubt is the dangerous word, right? Because it leads into this potential for a spiral that turns into I'm not good enough, and maybe I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, why did I take this role when I thought I could do it? And then you see all these challenges in front of you, and you're like, I'm not going to be able to get through it. And I think that's the part where it's the hardest to stop yourself, right? Because you get into this, at least myself, right? Like, I get into this moment where it's like one thing feeds another and feeds another, and the only thing that happens is you're looking at all the negatives, but you kind of forget about who you really are and how you got here and how you can step forward, right? And so, I think there's an aspect to it of the self-reflection and figuring out, well, wait a minute, I didn't just get here by accident, right? That can't happen, right? I remember working hard. I remember, asking for this, and I think I can do this, and I know I can do this, and then it becomes, of course I can do this, right? And so I think those are the things where you have to kind of figure out a way to spiral up instead of spiral down. But you got to find that stopping point and pause and look at something different, for a brief moment to get yourself stabilized, right?
I guess I will bring sort of the nerdy historical part to this. So imposter syndrome as a term was like officially coined in the late 70s by a couple of researchers that were studying high-performing women. And so I think that that's particularly relevant for this group because the entire sort of genesis of that concept, which is now very widespread and does not just apply to, or people use it in terms for not just minority or marginalized communities, but it was created in the study of highly successful women. And I think that the two most important parts of imposter syndrome to me are, one, that it is a competent person's belief that they will be discovered as incompetent. So it's a fear of discovery by a competent person. And so I think that, to me, that's really critical, because being kind of granular about that definition gives us the ability to be able to dissect some actionable tools about how we can talk to ourselves, or how we can combat, or how we can teach or train or address these issues as those feelings, those emotions come up, which are real and obviously impact us. But I think that, like, there is obviously like great comfort in sort of the shared humanity of this is something that everybody experiences. Yes, absolutely. But sort of the pragmatist in me is like, and then what? So now what do we do about that? And so I think that, that sort of inquiry is really interesting as far as how do we bring those conversations to the surface with the understanding that this is just sort of a shared human phenomenon. Like,
on what were some of the tools and or people that were influential in helping you reframe how you looked at imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think the community, um, that you can connect with, the people that you can connect with are essential, right? Um, and I recently went, on a college tour with my daughter, and one of the things that a few of the students said when they come in from environments that are not supportive, they're doing it by themselves, they don't actually ask for help. And the biggest advice that they gave was, look, when you're here as a freshman, don't think about doing it by yourself. And I think, like, when you start working in your industry for a long period of time, and you get to a level and you sit there and go, well, no, I should be able to do this by myself. I don't need help. And I don't think that's the case, right? I think the recognition and ability to reach out and connect with individuals and say, hey, wait, I don't think I know what I'm doing here, um, and get some validation to say, well, maybe you do, right? Why don't you just rely on who you are, what you've done, and then and go from there. I think those types of self checks, being able to connect and have those individuals that you can go to, is important. But the biggest hurdle is asking, right? Or feeling like you can ask. Um, and I think that's a challenge, right? That's, for me, sometimes, like, that's where, wait a minute, am I going to be seen as a failure if I go and ask for help? I can't do this by myself. I'm here, right? Um, but once you realize that you can and it's okay, then there's a path, right? That there's a path that you can find forward.
I agree in terms of the being able to connect with others. I think you hit on it on a point I actually jotted down, that shared sort of experience in one way or another. Most adults walking the earth have had at one time or another experienced their own self-doubt about something. And I think breaking down the barrier to ask is to ask, right? To feel like, okay, everyone's felt this way. It is okay for me to question something without thinking that it's outside of my reach, or that I don't deserve it, but more so, let me check for understanding. Let me ask and try to figure it out with the support of others, right? So I think that's a big component. I think that's broken down by recognizing, like, coming to terms with, this is something that everybody's going to go through, and everybody is going through in some way, shape, or form. The other piece, I think, or tool that I've used is really being able to look for, okay, I guess it depends on different scenarios, right? Like, if it's for you applying for a role, or you looking for an opportunity for an internship, or anything like that. For me, a mentor told me a long time ago to check my personal brand. What does that mean? Go around asking people that I've worked with or have history with, how do they see me? What do I bring to the table? If you can't see it in yourself, have that reinforced by having other people kind of give you what they think about, and not saying that they need to give you who you are, but sometimes you need to have that positive reinforcement enough times to think, okay, this is a reoccurring theme about me that I did not recognize in myself, that I keep doubting. But because I continually got those checks, those sort of those inputs, the feedback from those in my professional surroundings or my professional circle who I value, have provided me with this much feedback, they can't all be wrong. So I think that that's something that really propelled me when I was undergrad and going through grad school and trying to make decisions on where I was going to go from there. And that, the doubt voice crept in that I couldn't get into certain programs, that I just wasn't sure if I should even go through the trouble of trying, spending the money for the application fees and all those things. And my mentor told me, okay, I can tell you one thing, but go around and check. Here's a list of questions. Ask some folks and interview them about you, and that's basically the whole idea behind even a lot of those self-assessments. Like, you send them to people to assess you, and then you turn around and have your own self-assessment, and then you put that side by side and see how true you are to, or how true your brand shows up to others versus what you think of yourself. I think that's something that I took very seriously, for a long time, and it's one of the best things that have helped me to identify strengths. What was the biggest thing? What's the reoccurring thing that people keep saying? That's something I'm going to lean in on. That's what I know I'm good at. I no longer have the doubt about it because I've heard it way too many times. I didn't plant this seed. They told me.
I think that, in response to this question, I think trying to think about it through the frame of somebody that's in their collegiate experience and is a younger person. And I think that all of these things that we're telling you are things that are going to make sense to you intellectually and will not, for most people, will not land, in your body as a truth for a while, right? Like, until you have enough experience. So it's the intellectual versus I know this to be true, that everybody has vulnerabilities and blah, 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 that makes sense. And yet, and yet, people are very good at faking it. And what's the critical mass of people that you have to see, or experiences of empathy that you have to be able to really truly believe that. And I think that for me, it was in my 30s before that really truly hit home for me on a very visceral level, which I think is fine and I think is normal. And for most people that I talk to, especially women and people of color, because we have a different experience, right? That that a lot of people have experience, a moment where they were where the veil is lifted and you're holy shit, everybody's making it up. A lot of people have that, right? But I think what is at your age and at your experience level, what I think is interesting about this is, one, that any opportunity that we have to connect or think about sort of this shared humanity piece, right? Is that we are just humans walking around in meat suits, and this is what we're doing, right? That's the thing. I think that is valuable. I also think that this conversation is particularly relevant in the context of this program, right? So that programs like MVP are incredibly valuable because they're providing outside tangential community for you to have these conversations, because the real is that you're not probably at this phase of life going to overcome your imposter syndrome in your workspace unless you have some magical, wonderful workspace where they're really actively working to be able to develop their young people and to do those things. And there are places like that, but that's not the norm, right? And so these supplemental experiences in these tangential communities are incredibly important, because those are the spaces where you're going to be able to go do the sounding board, do the things, listen to people that are your peers and your mentors that are sort of outside of that space, and that you can take in to whatever your work environment is or whatever that looks like for you.
But I do have a question that I wanted to ask around for our students, as they're thinking of our fellows, as they're thinking of new initiatives, new roles that they're going to be taking in the future. What are some ways that they can anticipate imposter syndrome before it shows up?
I was going to say, just anticipating it is one thing. There's differences really, is that it's going to show up, right? coming to the acceptance that it's going to show up. There's going to be a point where you're working on something new that is overwhelming, that seems like I really don't have my bearings here. This is outside of my depth. But the biggest piece of advice I ever got was, as soon as a job becomes something that you could do with your eyes closed, it's time to move. It's time for you you have to remain challenged. You have to remain in a state of learning. As soon as that ends for you and you're kind of just automatically going through the motions where you're so confident, then you're actually sort of punching below your level at that point. Like you're staying stagnant. So recognizing and accepting that it's going to happen, but being okay with the discomfort of it, and being acceptant of and identifying from the very beginning. Like at the very beginning, you kind of look around like, okay, who am I going to build that relationship with, that I can ask a question and be vulnerable with, without feeling like that person is going to turn it on me in a negative way, or, out me for not knowing the answer, or out me for not figuring it out on my own. So again, building, there's a big difference between like connections across the community, and then internally with whatever it is that you're dealing with, building an internal network that you can trust and feel comfortable enough to ask those questions, knowing they're going to come.
I can share sort of what, from the Failure Lab side. So we actually work a lot it specifically in this topic. So like specifically around imposter syndrome, psychological safety, emotional intelligence, all of those sort of things. So our framework around failure and risk, right? So how does your relationship with failure impact your risk tolerance? And what does that mean for your behavior? So like when we're talking about failures is a synonym for stress, discomfort, right? Like how do we sit in discomfort? How do we anticipate discomfort? Failures, quote unquote, of action versus inaction. And so I think imposter syndrome really lends itself to that question of, what are the failures of inaction? What are the things that we are not doing because we have fear around what the potential outcome is? And so from my highly analytical brain, I was like, how do you actually break that apart? So our framework is, we talk through tendencies. So like, who are you as a person? Like every person is different. Like every person has a different makeup. Some of us are really obsessive and have like very circular thinking. Some of us are incredibly solutions driven. Some of us are, emotion forward, logic second. Some of us are impacted way more by outside expectations than internal expectations. So like, who are you as a human, right? What the expectations portion, right? So like, what are your expectations around a certain situation? So like, the question was like, how do we preemptively or anticipate imposter syndrome, right? So you have control over your expectations. You also have control over the inquiring about clear articulation of external expectations. So if you don't understand what the external expectation is, then that's going to leave more gray space, right? Like more spaces for you to fall into your spiraling down, right? Like and then the third bucket of work is agency, right? So like, and that's a spectrum as well. Like, how much agency do you have? How much autonomy do you have? What levers can you pull in any given situation, right? And different people just have different, some people, we all know people that like life happens to them, no agency, everything happens to them. We all know people on the other side of that spectrum too, that are just like, get out of my way, I'm doing the things, stop talking, right? Like, so there's that, but then there's also like sort of the real of the analysis of like, in this specific situation, what levers are at my disposal? What can I move? What is true about that? Right. So if we're talking about like from the analytical perspective of like, how do we preemptively assess where those feelings have potential to come in, and how can we prevent, like that feels very clear. Like, it's like, okay, so like, what am I usually like in this situation? What are my expectations around it? Am I clear about other people's expectations? what things can I actually move? Right.
I love that you said that.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, that's hits home for me very much so. 'Cause it's one of those things where you have to learn.
Right? Like
You do, you have to learn, well, what
you
is
have to
my
learn how to break your
agency?
heart. Yeah.
Yeah, what is my agency?
What is my agency? What can I actually move? Right? Like and so like because so much of imposter syndrome is all of that shoulds, right? And then like, are you actually putting responsibility on yourself for a thing that you can't actually move?
Bingo.
And I think that's an important element, right? That, you know, for me, Keith, you asked about how do you prevent it? Well, first you got to know it's coming.
Mhm.
How do you know it's coming? Usually you don't, right? But I have the sensitivity of when I get really nervous because I feel I don't know something. I don't know it well, right? Or I'm in a moment or a position where there's a lot of things that are just unknowns. That's when you're susceptible because something you say, somebody says, well, no, that's not the right way. This is the right way, right? And all of a sudden, this self doubt comes in. So the trigger is when I get nervous, right? I sit there and try to find, a rock or whatever my rock is, right? Yeah, in terms of, in my perspective, I like taking risks, right? And that's what defines me because I love innovating. And you can't do that unless you take risks. So I embrace that. I embrace that, hey, I'm going to go do something different. And it may not come out the way somebody expects, but that's okay because that's me. And they hired me into this role to not just do what the other person did. So I'm going to do it different. And so you go in with that confidence. So when you have that jittery, butterflies in your stomach moment, you can still cling to that to say, hey, no, this is who I am and this is how I'm going to persevere, right? So I think that part about it is, the self-confidence that you have to have in your own abilities and figure out, what Gwen said earlier is who are you? And stick to that core, not just what you've done, but who you are. If you can find that, it's very hard.
We lost your audio a little bit again. Just a little.
Complaint.
There it is.
So I think it's in your college career, this is really hard to do, to figure out who you are. But if you can find out who you are and how you got there. That's your rock. Hold on to it when you have that moment of jitteriness and you're going into this unknown and trying something new because it's going to help you grow, right? If you can do it in your sleep, you're probably not challenging yourself and growing. So you're going to have moments of jitteriness, right? Find the rock and grow from it.
I want to, before giving space for our audience and questions that they have, I definitely want to get a little bit of understanding on how, and feel free to share an example of this, of how you've navigated imposter syndrome. And whether that is a specific example of you feeling like an imposter, but would love to get a sense of how you might have navigated that situation and maybe the best piece of advice that you received from a mentor that helped you be successful in that moment.
I think for me, it's having someone that has experienced you in your best give you a moment to reflect, right? And I think the mentor for me asked me very specific questions of who you are, right? Like, who are you? And I'd go through, well, here's what I've done, here's my titles, here's the roles I've had. And I wasn't answering the question. I was just frustrating the heck out of me. But, I think once it was described as, well, that's not the core, right? So I would think you need to figure out who you are, right? And I remember um, in my first MVP assignment, right, with one of my mentees, I asked that question, and I don't know if you guys can still hear me, but I asked that question of my mentee. I said, "Who are you?" And they went through the same thing. So,
Sorry about that, Jamin.
well, why don't you go to Anna, and I'll tell you my story. I'm going to switch over to the Apple because I'm sure the Apple is going to work better. Hold on for a second.
So an example of imposter syndrome and how we overcame it. That's the frame, Jeff. Okay. So one of the things, is that, and this is kind of going to be like the reoccurring theme of Anna, right? Is that I'm like, how do you actually do the thing, right? Like how do you actually do the stuff, right? Like, so, I think that, one of the things that is challenging is that, in forums like this, or when you're listening to people that are in a different phase of their career or life or whatever, right? Is that there's like, we have to do this thing. And like, I think acknowledgement of the fact that all of this is a process and a journey. There is not like a thing that happens and you're like, I did the thing and now I am done. Like now I'm healed and solved. Right, that's not a thing. Like, so like am I like an example of I'm constantly like, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Like every, like once a year, I'm like, what should I be when I grow up? I'm not sure what's happening. And so I think that like from my perspective for the imposter syndrome piece, the place where my mentors have been the most helpful is not necessarily, and this is a little bit of like my tendency, like I actually don't have some people have very like nasty, mean self-talk, right? Like some people have like very like, and that's a for real thing for a lot of people. That's not something that's a me thing always. Like but I need somebody to be like, no, actually that goal is too small, right? Like you should be thinking more. Like you're not doing, you know what I mean? Like cast your net farther, imagine farther, like do the thing farther. And that's been a constant. Like I said that I came from a meeting with one of my mentors. I've been having conversations with this man for 8 years, and it's the same conversation. So much of it is the same conversation adjusted for a different phase of my evolution, right? So his, the biggest thing he gives me is constantly every time being like, no, you need to think bigger. You can do more than this if you choose to, right? Like if that you have that agency or that choice. So, I think that, yes, of course, it's incredibly important to ask those questions. Who am I? What's important to me? What are my tendencies? What are the things that, are me through and through? And also to realize that that is an evolving process, right? Like hopefully, we should all hope that we're still in that process, like until we're in the ground, because that's the most interesting stuff, right? Like it's how are we growing, how are we evolving, like
For sure, for sure. I'll while we wait for Jamie to join, I will share an imposter example that happened maybe about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. I'm part of an organization called Women of Color in Pharma, and I had gone to their conferences about 2 or 3 years before they approached me to help them work on their conference. I mentioned earlier that I did conference work and trade show management for the Merck Animal Health Division. And that's where I was at the time. And so I said, sure. And I joined and I did it. And I worked on it for a full year, sort of like as a baby project outside of work. The conference happened. It was amazing, great time. increased attendance by, 400 people. And so that was a really big win for us. And I remember the organization then asked me to join their board of directors because the conference is a big piece of their network, and it's where the community comes to meet and where new thoughts are ideated and connections are made, and people go back and continue to spread the word about the organization. And I remember definitely saying, like, I don't know if I'm at the level to be on a board of director, like on somebody's non-for-profit board. I'm not there yet. And I remember distinctly talking to one of my mentors who consequently came from that organization. And she was the one who put me, I didn't know that, but she's the one who put my name in and said she should be on the board. Like, look what she did. She should be here. And so it was her who kind of came to me and said, well, Gwen, like, we're not asking you to do anything different than you hadn't done already this year. You did it without the title. And that to me was just like a wow, aha moment. It's like, just like you said, sometimes we think things are bigger and we're already operating in that capacity. And it's sometimes it's just a title, guys. It's just the thing you might already be doing in some facet or another. And now you're getting the name and the visibility for it. But I think, again, it's definitely connection, definitely having that personal board of directors, checking yourself for who you are, and also just understanding it's always going to come up. You've got to have a plan for how you personally will get past it, because you've got to do it. It's a do or don't do, but to not do is to stay still. And we don't want to stay still, especially after being a part of an organization such as this. I think it's so important because I can speak from I'm a first generation college grad. I, went to grad school, first generation everything for my family. And we didn't have, my family was blue collar. We didn't have, the closest I might have gotten to somebody that was at a professional level was people I went to church with and might have had, somebody's family friend or aunt or uncle but not really close enough where we were regularly seeing each other for me to ask questions of. This is a unique opportunity to really, really bring you people that are experiencing or further advancing their careers and really level set that it just evolves, but the problems don't change. The issues don't change.
100%.
It evolves from where you are in the stage in your life. And so it's important now to build those connections, in which you guys are doing taking the first step to do so by being even a part of MVP.
Yeah.
100%. Several of my clients are nonprofits that we're working on sort of org sustainability and like infrastructure things. And just like specifically to your story, Gwen, most board members have absolutely no idea what it means to be on a board. Like, they literally don't know.
Yeah,
like they don't have any idea what their liability is. They don't know what their role is. They don't understand like the way that the organization works. And that's all like has to be taught or not. I mean, like, they just don't know. And so, I mean, I think too, like, how do you find that information? Right. And so much of what Gwen was talking about is 100% true. And it's all like, can you ask the right question to get the right information, right?
Yeah.
And where and who and what are the resources to be able to do that? Like, there are tons of classes about like what it means to be on a board, right? Like, if you don't know, you can find out. Like, like there's all of those things. And most people sitting on boards have absolutely no idea what what they've signed up for. So, like,
Yeah, I mean, I think though, I think these are all valid, right? But when I think about as a college student, like, what is that? Who am I and what have I done, right? You're in academics, you've potentially had an internship, but you need to kind of figure out
some of the things I think Gwen mentioned earlier, Anna mentioned it earlier around feedback, right? What do others think of you? And then I asked this question, what I was trying to say before my audio was not behaving, was that I asked one of my mentees, and I said, well, who are you, right? And then couldn't answer the question, right? They go into this experience of like, here's what I've done, here's the grades I've gotten, but that's not who you are, right? So I asked the question of, well, how would your mom describe you if she was, sitting here, or your father describe you? And then they're like, well, but that's not, you know, they're being optimistic. They're my parents. They're going to obviously say good things. And I'm like, yeah, but that gives you a sense of who you are. They've known you the longest, right? And, that's your core. And then you have to kind of figure out who you are professionally, academically, and others. And that becomes your foundation of self-confidence, because that doesn't change. They can't take that away from you, right? So when you go into these roles where you don't know how to be on a board, you don't know, your title or whether you're worth it or not, you kind of go back and say, well, you know what, this is who I am, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm going to deliver, and it's going to add value. And that's your personal self-confidence that you have to kind of, push yourself. And if others don't see it around you, learn from it, right? Get the feedback and grow. But if you're afraid of even being who you are, then you're going to fail, because it's going to come out. People are going to know it. They're going to know that, you're just, you're not authentic, right? They're going to read right through it.
I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's a good way of really wrapping us up in this conversation, is that it is that self-confidence, it is that positive self-talk that really helps in getting through those moments. Again, the imposter syndrome, it's going to show up. So what are you going to do? And so it's really, and Jamie, you brought this up earlier too, and Gwen and Anna in different ways as well, of being okay with asking questions. And that is a skill, and that's a trait, and that's something that's important. Being okay with asking for help. Those are things, while I think sometimes it can feel that those are things that show that you're not ready for the role, or that you're not the right person, is actually the opposite. Because the right person is the person that's going to ask the right questions and going to be thoughtful and strategic about it. And so I really appreciate you all for just really the great insights that you provided into this topic, sharing also of like how it has shown up in your careers. You not only are our fellows, and our MVP community has really gotten a lot of insights from you all, but I've taken plenty of notes too. So thank you for that. I want to now segue into the Q&A portion. I know we have some questions that have already jumped into the chat, and so I'll kind of throw that out to the group. But moving into the Q&A, we have one question already queued up from our CEO, which I think is a great question for us to start, which is, what is the best advice you would offer young students of color as they enter their first job? Whoever would like to take
I
that
can
one.
take it first. Go for
Well,
it, Anna.
I was thinking specifically about this group, right? And trying to remember what it felt like to be a recent graduate. And I do remember being like, especially I think for the demographic of this group of fellows, is that you are high performers. You are obviously people just by default of being in this space, right? Like you are people that are out there scanning the field for what are the opportunities, what are the things. And one of the things that was the biggest shock to me once I graduated was that the world isn't laid out like school. Like, right? Like I was like, I know how to do school, right? You're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do this. I know how to accelerate it. I know how to decelerate it. I know I'm supposed to do this, you're supposed to do this. Then sometimes there's a choice, but you know what that is. And then I remember being like, where is the map? Now, like there, like the map is, it's not, because it's so structured. And so I think especially for people that are high achievers
like inherently and by practice learn the system and then figure out how to maximize the system, right? In school is one type of system. And then you come out into the workforce and that is a different system, right? So even just like thinking about that is, I guess, my advice, right? Like that, right? It's like that it's not the same. The things that got you where you were in the system that you have figured out and you know how to maximize it, you know how to excel in that system, right? The thought experiment is, how do I take the skills, right? The skill sets that are transferable and then transfer them into this other system that is new and much more nebulous, much more changing, lots of different things are happening in it. So how do I take the things that really worked for me, right? Whatever that looks like. So like, you know, like I'm thinking like I had like a formula for writing a term paper, right? Like I knew I would get an A if I did it like this, right? Okay, so that's great. So like the skill set of figuring out that formula could potentially be useful in a different context, right? Like I figured it out for this, how do I transfer it into that next thing? So I guess that's my advice is like, one, the world is not like school. And two, you've learned a lot of things, or you will learn a lot of things that are hyper transferable, but like spending the energy trying to think about how you would transfer it, or like what the raw skill is, right? It's not that I wrote a paper about, you know, genetic cloning, right? Like, no, it's like, that's not the skill. The skill is, you know, like, how did I do it? How did I do the research? What did I do? Like, what are the transferable parts?
Yeah. I mean, my first job coming out of college, I was a chemical engineer, right? And my first job was on a production floor where I was asked to manage 60 people and a manufacturing floor. And you may ask, like, what do they see? Like I asked, what do they see in me to put me in charge of 60 people when I just came out of college, no experience? And this has nothing to do with chemical engineering, right? But it's exactly what Anna shared is the problem solving skills, right? Being able to facilitate, you know, and learn how to work with a broad team, lead them to achieve results that, you know, lead to, you know, sales and profit, right? And those things are business things that I had to learn and rely on a fundamental of, well, I know how to solve problems. I can walk in here. I can relate with people, right? And if I relate with people, I can learn from them and I can grow. So it didn't become about taking on this huge responsibility. It became about, you know, some of those fundamentals that I learned in school and being comfortable in that environment and being comfortable to say, I'm an engineer, I can figure out problems, right? And how to solve them. So this is just another problem that I need to solve. So I think those are important things to just, as a student coming out into the industry, you have to have that confidence. It's not what you learned in the books, right? You're not going to know the variables. No one's going to give you, you know, all, you know, the problem statement. You may have to figure it out yourself and build it yourself. But you've done that, right? Like that's what college is for. They've trained you to do that. And now you have to just step out and be able to do it.
Good time. I feel like you dropped the mic there, Damon.
Sorry.
I
I didn't mean to do that, Gwen.
No, no, that was a good one. No, I 100% agree with what both my fellow panelists have shared here. I think sorry to sound like a broken record, but I think it's really going in, being confident in who and what you bring to the table, but humble enough to know you don't know everything and you need to reach out and learn and ask and grow your network right from the gate, right when you go in there. I think my first role was in sales, and I think the biggest aha for me was understanding, like, I can talk to people, I can sell, I can sell a lot of things. I can sell, I can talk and I can sell, and I can organize information. And I took that and ran with it. But the piece that I learned on the job was that people, A, buy from who they like, and B, you have to be able to solve what their issue is. Understand what their need is and solve that. So I think that's something that you can transfer to any job or any role that you take on, is to excel in it. It's, everybody has their procedures, their roles, the rules, regulations. This is what we do. This is what we do. But to kind of stand out and make yourself known is to be able to see and assess what the problem is. What are the issues in your role or in your organization or in your department, and how can I be an answer? What can I bring to the table to be an answer to this problem? I think that's a huge thing that I didn't take away until maybe 2 or 3 years into sales, and I wanted to go into headquarters, trying to figure out, how do I break in? What do I do different that every salesperson is trying to hit a number? And it was figure out a program, figure out a training. We're not using everybody. Marketing keeps making iPad versions for detail aids, and we're not using it. It's because nobody knows how to use it. Nobody knows how to go through each new version and learn it. Nobody has time. And I created these sales training classes where we would just kind of do what's that called, mock details with each other, calls. And it was just an after hours hour. Everybody could bring a drink, and we would just do role playing. That's the word I'm looking for. It's been so long, I couldn't find it. But it was just a small role playing happy hour that we would do every month with the new iPads. And it trained everybody, and I got some kind of award out of that. And it was just like, be an answer. And after that, I applied. Everybody at HQ already knew my name because I was the one that had happy hours while trading. And I got in. And I think that that's something that, you stick to what you know, be confident in that, but then be humble enough to know you've got a long way to go, and you've got to learn it from those that came before you.
You all basically took that question, and also the question I was going to ask around like parting advice that you would give like our students, and like just you just did my job for me, so I can't thank y'all enough. So I have to come up with a different last question, which is, you have a time, like I always have a little backup question. So before we close out, I would love to ask this question, kind of like just throwing it out there. You have a time machine and you can go back to college sophomore, junior year. What are you telling sophomore, junior you with your time machine? What advice or insights are you preparing them for? You might just tell them like, hey, best of luck. But what would you tell them?
I would have said go for it earlier. There was a couple of things that I could have did earlier that I delayed because of self-doubt. So I say go for it. Now.
I like that.
For me personally, I wish that I was very head down in college. I was very like I said, I was figuring out how it worked, and I was going to maximize all the things, right? Like I was going to try to do, like, my Venn diagrams were so overlapped that I was trying to do all the things that, and I wish that I had paid attention more to things that were happening outside of that. Like, I actually wish that I had learned, because like I actually got out of college and didn't feel like I practiced a lot of skills at a different level, but I didn't learn as much as I could have from my fellow students, from my, what their experiences were. I wish that I had been more curious and less focused on just like excelling at all the things. And that's something that, you know, it took me a lot of years to sort of get to that point. And frankly, there's privilege in that, right? Right? Like there's privilege in having the permission and having the space to be able to play, you know.
So Keith, I think like it's an important one, right? Like I think what Gwen has shared and what Hannah shared are good spectrums, but mine is actually, I wouldn't go back to sophomore year. I'd probably go back to freshman year, because in sophomore year, I had a 2.5 GPA for my freshman year. My advisor in the Chem department told me that my best option was to drop out. And I took that as, what did you say to me? Right? Like that's not who I am, right? So like and subsequently every semester afterwards, I didn't get anything lower than a 3.9. And so that's probably like a turning point. So I struggle with this question in terms of would I do things differently? And I almost feel like if I didn't have that failure, then I would not have been able to find that moment where I have, and Kobe Bryant is one of my favorite basketball players, right? That Mamba mentality of prove them wrong. So I would have taught myself that earlier, right? Whether it's going to college from a very small school or small high school of like 50 kids and going into this large university, just prove them wrong, right? And do it earlier. And I would have graduated with a much higher GPA than I did if I didn't have my freshman year, right? So, and what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything, right? That, the GPA at the end of the day today doesn't mean anything. But what it does is it gives you that confidence of, wait, maybe I could have, applied to med school. Maybe I could have given myself different options that I chose not to because I didn't even think I could make it as an engineer, much less get a graduate degree and become a doctor, right? And so that's where I would have given myself a Mamba mentality earlier before that failure point.
I like that. I think that's such a great way to close of how it is those moments that are really like pivotal points for us in terms of failing and how that failure can allow for us to fail forward, and how it's important at times to lean into that failure because of what it'll provide for us or teach us. So I think that was a great way to kind of close out this panel. Gwen, again, Jamin did the mic drop. Like he didn't plan for it, but he did it. So I think it's a great way to wrap up. And I just thank you all for your time, your insight, the gems that you gave to our community, our viewers that are here, as well as those that will get to see the recording. So just thank you for your time and being our guests.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.